He was just a janitor. She was the city's most powerful billionaire. One careless laugh changed everything, because beneath his rolled sleeve was ink that carried a secret worth more than her empire. The moment she saw it, her smile vanished, and the past she buried came rushing back. Elena Voss had built her reputation on control. Control of markets, control of conversations, control of every room she entered. At 36, she was one of the most admired and photographed tech billionaires in the country, known not only for her intelligence but for her presence. She had the kind and elegance that turned heads without effort, sharp, tailored suits, perfectly styled hair, and a calm expression that rarely revealed emotion. Business magazines described her as visionary, competitors called her relentless, employees simply called her intimidating. That morning, she stepped out of a black luxury car in front of Ridgeway Academy, a struggling inner-city school her company had recently acquired as part of a large education reform investment. The building stood tired and worn, bricks faded, windows slightly cracked at the corners, paint peeling in places that tried and failed to hide years of neglect. Elena removed her sunglasses slowly and studied the structure with analytical eyes. To her, buildings were not emotional spaces. They were projects, systems to improve, assets to restructure. A small crowd of administrators waited nervously at the entrance. The principal wiped his hands repeatedly against his jacket before shaking hers. Cameras followed behind, capturing every step as she walked through the main hallway in sleek heels that echoed against the uneven tiles. The sound created a rhythm that matched her pace, steady and confident. She noticed everything immediately: the outdated lockers, the flickering fluorescent lights, the scuffed trophy case near the gym entrance. Her assistant walked beside her, quietly listing renovation budgets and projected timelines. Elena nodded occasionally, but said little. Her mind was already calculating costs, brand positioning, future press releases. To her, this school was not just a charity gesture, it was an opportunity to demonstrate impact. As they turned a corner near the science wing, the group slowed. A large metal locker lay tilted away from the wall, its hinges broken, screws scattered across the floor. Kneeling beside it was a man in a simple maintenance uniform, sleeves rolled up to reveal powerful forearms marked by years of physical labor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with controlled strength as he lifted the locker upright without assistance. The muscles in his arms tightened with effort, yet his face remained calm. There was nothing hurried about him, no sign of frustration, just focus. A small boy sat a few feet away on the hallway bench, quietly reading a worn paperback book, occasionally glancing up at the man with quiet admiration. Elena stopped walking. Her eyes shifted from the broken locker to the child, then back to the man. "Is that your son?" she asked, her tone smooth but edged with disapproval. The man stood upright, steady and composed. Up close, he looked even stronger, not in a flashy way, but in the way of someone who understood physical endurance. His posture was straight, his expression respectful, but not submissive. "Yes," he replied evenly. "School closed early today. I didn't have anyone to watch him." Elena's gaze moved briefly to the boy again. The child quickly lowered his eyes back to his book. "This is a workplace," she said, her voice calm yet firm. "We're trying to establish a standard of excellence here. It's not exactly professional." A few staff members behind her gave small, nervous laughs, eager to align themselves with her authority. The man did not react to the laughter. He simply nodded once. Understood. There was no apology in his tone, no defensiveness either, just acknowledgement. Elena felt a faint irritation she couldn't quite explain. She was accustomed to people adjusting themselves in her presence, straightening posture, speaking more carefully, trying to impress her. This man did none of that. He neither challenged nor flattered her. He simply returned to tightening the bolts on the locker, as if her opinion did not alter his rhythm. As he reached upward to secure the top hinge, his sleeves shifted slightly higher. And that's when she saw it. Ink stretched across his forearm. Not decorative, not chaotic, a precise design. Coordinates etched in small, sharp numbers. Beneath them, a date, and under the date, a single word written in bold letters. Everest. Her breath caught, almost invisibly. For a moment, the hallway noise faded. 5 years earlier, before the billion-dollar company, before the global recognition, Elena had stood at the base of Mount Everest, determined to prove something to the world. Back then, investors doubted her, competitors underestimated her. Climbing the highest mountain on Earth had been her private declaration of strength. But the expedition had gone wrong. A sudden avalanche tore through our path during descent. The world turned white. Sound vanished beneath crushing snow. She remembered the panic in her lungs as oxygen thinned. She remembered trying to stand and failing. She remembered cold seeping into her bones in a way that felt permanent. And she remembered being lifted. Strong arms securing her harness, a deep voice telling her to stay awake, the sensation of being carried through a storm she could no longer fight. She survived. The headlines later called it resilience. Interviews framed it as proof of her unstoppable will. She never corrected them. She never mentioned the rescuer whose name she had never fully known. Now, standing in a worn school hallway, she stared at the same coordinates permanently marked on the arm of a janitor she had just purchased. Her voice changed, almost imperceptibly. "You were on the Everest rescue team." The man paused before lowering his arm. His eyes met hers directly for the first time. They were steady, observant, not impressed by wealth or status. "Yes," he answered simply. The administrators around her shifted uncomfortably, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. Elena stepped closer, studying his face. Memory sharpened. The build, the calm, the voice she could almost hear again beneath the roar of wind. "You carried someone down during the avalanche," she said quietly. Recognition flickered across his features. He studied her more carefully now, as if placing a distant image into focus. "You survived," he replied. There was no pride in his voice, no dramatic tone, just confirmation. The boy on the bench looked up again, sensing something serious in the air. Elena felt something unfamiliar press against her carefully constructed composure. She had faced boardroom battles worth billions without hesitation. Yet standing in front of this man, she felt exposed in a way she could not explain. 5 years ago, she had been at her weakest, and this man had carried her when she could not carry herself. Now, he stood in front of her wearing a maintenance badge, fixing broken lockers in a school she had just purchased. For the first time that day, Elena Voss was not thinking about investments, branding, or press coverage. She was thinking about debt. Not financial debt, personal debt. And she realized as the hallway remained painfully quiet that she had just laughed at the man who once saved her life. The hallway remained still long after his words settled between them. "You survived." Marcus had not said it with admiration or accusation. It was simply a fact, delivered in the same calm tone he had used moments earlier while tightening bolts into a broken locker. But for Elena, those two words carried the weight of 5 buried years. The administrators behind her shifted awkwardly, unsure whether to continue the tour or disappear. Cameras were still raised, though no one dared to interrupt. Elena felt the familiar instinct to regain control of the moment, to redirect attention, to reshape the narrative into something polished and manageable. Yet for the first time in a very long while, control felt fragile. She studied Marcus more carefully now, seeing beyond the maintenance uniform. His build was unmistakable, not gym-crafted vanity, but practical strength formed by real labor and endurance. His posture was steady, grounded, the kind of posture built in extreme conditions where panic costs lives. She remembered that steadiness in the storm, the way the rescuer's voice had cut through chaos with simple commands. "Stay awake, breathe, focus on me." She had clung to that voice when her own strength dissolved. "I never knew your name," she said quietly, her tone no longer sharp but searching. "Marcus Hale," he replied. The name landed heavily. She repeated it in her mind, attaching it to a memory she had avoided revisiting. After the avalanche, she had been airlifted to safety. Sponsors spun the story quickly. Interviews framed her as determined, fearless, unstoppable. The rescue team was mentioned briefly in articles, but never highlighted. She had been too focused on rebuilding momentum, on proving that the incident did not weaken her ambition. In truth, she had avoided the rescue team intentionally. Gratitude would have required vulnerability. Vulnerability did not fit the brand she was building. I tried to find the team afterward, she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she questioned their accuracy. Marcus did not challenge her. He simply picked up another tool and adjusted the locker door until it aligned perfectly with the frame. Rescue contracts rotate. We move where we're needed. His son closed the paper back gently and slid off the bench, walking closer to his father but staying respectfully silent. Alina noticed the way Marcus instinctively positioned himself slightly between the boy and the crowd. Protective, subtle, automatic. "You left the mountains," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He paused for a fraction of a second, not because he hesitated, but because he chose his words carefully. "My wife got sick. Long-term illness. Rescue work doesn't offer stability. I needed consistency." Elena absorbed that quietly. She was used to ambition-driven decisions, risk-taking, expansion, scaling upward. Marcus had moved in the opposite direction, from the highest peaks in the world to a maintenance hallway in a struggling school. Not because he failed, but because someone needed him more. "Is she—" Elena began, then stopped. "She passed 2 years ago," Marcus finished calmly. The simplicity of his tone made the statement heavier. There was no dramatic pause, no visible grief, just acceptance shaped by time. The boy looked down at the floor, accustomed to the conversation. Elena felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. 5 years ago, Marcus had carried her down a mountain while risking his own life. Later, when his own world collapsed quietly in hospital corridors, there were no headlines, no interviews praising his endurance. Strength in the spotlight had been celebrated. Strength in private had gone unnoticed. "I never thanked you," she said finally, letting the words exist fully in the open air. Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I did my job." "That wasn't just a job," she replied. "It was," he said gently. "Up there, everyone relies on someone else. Titles don't matter in a storm." The statement struck deeper than he intended. Titles don't matter in a storm. Elena had built an empire on titles. Founder, CEO, visionary, billionaire. She had spent years proving she could stand alone at the top. Yet on Everest, she had not stood alone. She had been carried. Behind her, one of the board members cleared his throat softly, attempting to remind her of the schedule. Elena raised a hand slightly without turning around, signaling silence. The power dynamic in the hallway had shifted, though no one could clearly define how. She looked around at the cracked tiles, the outdated lockers, the dim lighting. When her company acquired Ridgeway Academy, she viewed it as a strategic move to expand her education portfolio. But standing here now, she saw something different. This building was not just a project. It was where Marcus chose stability for his son, where he traded glaciers for fluorescent lights, where he fixed broken hinges instead of climbing frozen cliffs. "Does anyone here know what you used to do?" she asked. "No, it's not relevant." "It's extremely relevant," she said quietly. He shook his head once. "Not to this job." The humility unsettled her. In her world, achievements were currency. People displayed them aggressively. Awards lined office walls, media clippings framed in glass. Marcus carried his most extraordinary chapter in silence, reduced to a small tattoo hidden beneath rolled sleeves. Elena noticed the coordinates again. The date beneath them marked the exact day of the avalanche. He had inked the moment permanently onto his skin, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. "Why the tattoo?" she asked. "To remember what matters," he replied. "And what's that?" "That survival isn't about ego, it's about responsibility." The hallway seemed even quieter now. Even the administrators felt it, though they didn't fully understand why. Elena realized something uncomfortable. For years, she had told the Everest story as proof of her personal resilience. She had framed survival as individual triumph, yet Marcus viewed survival as shared responsibility, a team effort, a chain of strength. She had built a brand around conquering mountains. He had built a life around carrying others down them. The contrast unsettled her more than she expected. "Marcus," she said slowly, testing the familiarity of his name, "what are you doing fixing lockers when you could be leading rescue operations?" He looked at his son, who now stood quietly at his side. "Leadership isn't about altitude, it's about presence. My son needs me here." There was no bitterness in his words, no regret. For the first time since arriving that morning, Elena no longer saw a janitor disrupting her vision of excellence. She saw a man who had already proven his excellence in places far harsher than any boardroom, and she began to realize that perhaps she had misunderstood what strength truly looked like. The rest of the tour passed in a blur for Elena, though no one around her noticed the shift happening behind her composed expression. She answered questions, nodded at renovation proposals, and approved preliminary budgets, but her mind remained in that hallway beside a broken locker and a man who once carried her through a storm. By the time she returned to her car, the cameras had captured polished statements about infrastructure upgrades and community investment. What they did not capture was the silence inside her. For years, she had moved forward without looking back. Everest had been packaged as a dramatic chapter in her rise to power, a symbol of endurance that strengthened her public image. Yet now that chapter felt incomplete. She had survived, yes, but survival had not been a solo achievement. It had been handed to her by someone who never claimed credit. Back at her headquarters, surrounded by glass walls and city skyline views, Elena did something she rarely allowed herself to do. She paused. She requested the archived reports from the Everest rescue mission 5 years earlier. Her executive assistant looked surprised but complied immediately. Within an hour, digital files filled her screen. Names of team members, weather reports, injury logs. Among them, she found his full record. Marcus Hale, high-altitude rescue specialist, decorated for field leadership, cited multiple times for voluntary risk beyond required duty. The avalanche report detailed how he had returned into unstable snow after securing 2 climbers, refusing extraction until the last missing team member was located. That team member was her. She leaned back slowly in her chair, absorbing the details she had never fully read before. In interviews, she had spoken confidently about refusing to quit, about mental strength, but the report stated clearly that she had been unconscious when found. Severe oxygen deprivation, hypothermic collapse. Without rapid descent, survival probability was low. The document was clinical, detached, yet between the lines lay a simple truth. Her life had been placed in someone else's hands. She felt something unfamiliar press against her carefully managed confidence. It was not weakness, it was perspective. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus finished his shift at Ridgeway Academy. He walked home with his son, Daniel, whose small hand occasionally brushed against his father's larger one. Their apartment was modest but orderly. Marcus cooked dinner while Daniel worked on homework at the kitchen table. The routine was steady, predictable. After Daniel went to bed, Marcus sat quietly for a moment, staring at nothing in particular. Seeing Elena again had stirred memories he had long set aside. He remembered carrying her weight against his back while snow tore at his face. He remembered calculating each step, knowing one slip could send them both into a crevasse. He had not known who she was then, just another climber whose life depended on his focus. Later, when media reports celebrated her survival, he recognized her name but chose not to reach out. Recognition had never been his pursuit. The next morning, Elena returned to Ridgeway Academy without media, without entourage, without announcement. She wore a simpler outfit, still elegant but less theatrical. The principal was startled to see her alone. She asked where she could find Marcus. He was in the gym's storage room repairing loose bleachers. When she entered, he glanced up briefly, but did not appear surprised. "You didn't bring cameras today," he observed calmly. "No," she replied, "this isn't for them." She stepped inside fully, the echo of the empty gym amplifying the quiet tension between them. For a moment, neither spoke. She was accustomed to leading conversations, yet this felt different. "I read the rescue report," she began. "You went back into the avalanche zone after securing others." Marcus tightened a bolt before answering. There was one person unaccounted for. "Me," she said softly. He met her gaze without hesitation. "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "You could have died." He shrugged slightly. "That's the job." She shook her head. "No, that's a choice." He studied her expression carefully, noticing something had shifted. She was no longer speaking from a position of superiority, but from something closer to honesty. "Why didn't you ever reach out?" she asked. "You could have leveraged that story. Media attention, sponsorships." Marcus gave a faint, almost amused smile. "Leverage implies I expected something in return. I didn't." His answer unsettled her more than any criticism could have. In her world, everything had exchange value. Partnerships, interviews, endorsements, even philanthropy carried branding implications. Yet here stood a man who risked his life without calculation. She walked slowly across the gym floor, heels softer against the polished wood. "Do you ever regret leaving the mountains?" she asked. Marcus paused before answering. "I miss the clarity. Up there, decisions are simple. You either act or someone dies. Down here, everything is layered with politics." She absorbed that quietly. "Then why stay?" "Because my son doesn't need a hero on a mountain. He needs a father at dinner." The simplicity of that answer felt heavier than any corporate strategy meeting she had ever led. Elena realized that Marcus had redefined strength in a way she had never considered. She had equated strength with expansion, dominance, constant upward motion. Marcus equated strength with presence, sacrifice, responsibility. "You know," she said slowly, "my company is developing emergency response technology, drones, predictive weather modeling, satellite communication tools." He listened without interrupting. "But we design everything from boardrooms. We've never had someone who's actually carried a body down a mountain test our systems." Marcus understood the implication immediately, but remained quiet. "I'm not offering charity," she continued firmly. "I'm offering collaboration, leadership, real input." He studied her carefully, searching for ego behind her words. "Why now?" he asked. She met his gaze steadily. "Because 5 years ago, you carried me, and I built a story that erased you from it. That's not leadership, that's pride." The admission lingered in the air between them. It was the first time she had spoken that truth aloud. Marcus did not respond immediately. He looked down briefly, considering the weight of what she was proposing. "If I consider this," he said finally, "it's not about recognition." "I know," she replied. "It's about impact." The gym fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Not tense, not awkward. It felt like the space before a decision that could change both their paths. For the first time since Everest, Elena felt she was standing at the edge of something unpredictable. Not a mountain of ice and wind, but a crossroads of humility and growth. And unlike 5 years ago, she wasn't waiting to be carried. She was choosing to step forward differently.
The proposal did not move quietly through Elena's company. Within 48 hours of her private conversation with Marcus in the school gym, a closed-door board meeting was scheduled on the top floor of Voss Dynamics headquarters. The conference room overlooked the city skyline, glass walls reflecting polished confidence and billion-dollar ambition. Around the table sat executives who had helped Elena scale her empire from a small startup to a global technology leader. They were sharp, analytical, and loyal to growth metrics. What they were not prepared for was her next announcement. Elena stood at the head of the table, tablet in hand, posture steady. "We are restructuring the Emergency Response Division," she began calmly. "Effective immediately, I am appointing a new director of field operations." A few eyebrows lifted. The current director shifted in his seat. "This individual has over a decade of high-altitude rescue leadership, extreme condition survival coordination, and hands-on crisis response." She tapped the screen, and Marcus Hale's service record appeared on the central display. The room grew quiet, but not impressed, confused. "He is currently employed as maintenance staff at Ridgeway Academy," she continued evenly. The confusion sharpened into disbelief. One of the senior board members leaned forward. "Elena, with respect, are we discussing the janitor?" The word carried more weight than intended. Elena did not flinch. "We are discussing a man who has led rescue teams in conditions none of us in this room would survive for 5 minutes. Another executive spoke carefully. "Leadership at scale requires corporate experience, not just field skill." Elena's gaze hardened slightly. Field skill is leadership when lives are on the line. The debate intensified. Questions about optics, investor reactions, shareholder confidence. Appointing a janitor to a leadership role would invite scrutiny. Media narratives would question her judgment. Stock volatility was mentioned. Elena listened to every argument without interrupting. When the room quieted, she spoke with deliberate calm. 5 years ago, I survived Mount Everest because this man chose to go back into an avalanche zone after securing others. He did not calculate publicity, he calculated responsibility. We build technology that claims to save lives, yet none of our leadership has physically carried one down a mountain." Silence settled heavily across the table. The board's resistance did not disappear, but Elena's conviction was unshakable. "This is not charity," she clarified. "This is strategic correction. We need someone who understands consequence beyond quarterly reports." A long pause followed. Finally, the chairman exhaled slowly. "If this fails, Elena, it will reflect directly on you." She met his eyes steadily. "Then it fails on me." The decision passed with reluctant approval. Meanwhile, Marcus was replacing ceiling panels when Elena called him to request a formal meeting at headquarters. He arrived the next afternoon wearing a clean but simple button-down shirt, posture as grounded as ever. The building's glass exterior reflected the sky like a polished mirror, a stark contrast to the brick walls of Ridgeway Academy. Inside, employees glanced curiously at the tall man walking beside their CEO. Some recognized him from the school visit footage circulating internally. Few understood why he was there. Elena led him into the same conference room where the board debate had unfolded. This time it was empty, sunlight spilling across the long table. "They're skeptical," she said honestly. Marcus nodded once. "They should be." Her lips curved slightly at the response. "I'm offering you Director of Field Operations. You'll oversee live testing of our emergency systems, train response teams, and reshape how we approach disaster zones." Marcus absorbed the words carefully. "Is this not symbolic?" he asked. "No," she replied. "It's operational." He walked slowly toward the window, looking down at the city far below. "If I accept," he said, "I won't be your story." Elena stepped closer, but maintained respectful distance. "I don't need a story. I need someone who tells me when my systems fail in real conditions." He turned to face her fully. "Field decisions won't always align with investor comfort." "I'm prepared for that," she said. He studied her expression for ego, for branding motives, for hidden agenda. He found none strong enough to outweigh sincerity. "What about my son?" Marcus asked finally. "Relocation, schooling, stability?" Elena had anticipated the question. "Full relocation support, flexible schedule where possible, and Ridgeway Academy will receive expanded funding for after-school programs, whether you stay or not." He narrowed his eyes slightly. "That can't be conditional." She shook her head. "It's not." The tension in his shoulders eased almost imperceptibly. "Then I'll consider it," he said. She extended her hand, not as a billionaire sealing a deal, but as a leader inviting partnership. After a moment, he shook it. The gesture was firm, equal. Word of the appointment spread quickly. Internally, reactions were mixed. Some admired Elena's boldness, others questioned her judgment. Externally, when the announcement became public, media headlines ranged from "unconventional leadership move" to "risky gamble by tech mogul." Elena read none of them. Instead, she spent her afternoon reviewing field simulation plans with Marcus in a testing warehouse filled with drones, thermal cameras, and satellite communication units. Watching him move through the equipment was different from watching executives present slides. He handled devices like tools, not trophies. He asked direct questions about battery endurance in sub-zero temperatures. He pointed out structural vulnerabilities in portable shelters. He challenged assumptions about response times in mountainous terrain. Engineers who initially dismissed him as symbolic quickly realized he understood operational gaps they had overlooked. "In a storm, gloves freeze," he said during one demonstration. "These touchscreens won't respond." An engineer blinked, then nodded slowly. Adjustments were noted immediately. Elena observed quietly from the side, recognizing something powerful unfolding. Marcus was not adapting to her world. He was improving it. Later that evening, as the warehouse emptied, Elena approached him. "You were right," she admitted. "Our systems look strong on paper, not always in reality." Marcus wiped his hands with a cloth. "Reality doesn't care about branding." She smiled faintly. "I'm starting to understand that." The partnership had officially begun, but beneath the professional alignment lay something deeper, mutual respect, not born from titles, but from shared survival. For Elena, this chapter marked more than a strategic shift. It marked the first time she had chosen humility over optics in a public decision. And for Marcus, it marked a return to high-stakes responsibility, not for recognition, but for impact. The mountain had once forced them together through chaos. Now, years later, they stood on different ground, choosing collaboration instead of accident. And as the city lights flickered out outside the warehouse windows, both understood that the real test was not the board's approval or the media's reaction. The real test would be whether this new division could save lives when conditions turned hostile again.
The weeks following Marcus Hale's appointment were anything but smooth. Inside Voss Dynamics, skepticism lingered like static in the air. Executives who had spent years climbing corporate ladders now reported to a man whose last official title had been maintenance staff. Whispers traveled through hallways polished with ambition. Some questioned Elena's judgment openly in private meetings. Others waited quietly, expecting the experiment to fail on its own. Marcus, however, walked into headquarters each morning without hesitation. He did not attempt to imitate corporate culture, nor did he resist it. He simply focused on the work. His office remained minimal, no framed achievements, no dramatic decor. The only personal item on his desk was a small photograph of his son, Daniel, smiling with a missing front tooth. On the first day of full field simulations, Marcus gathered engineers, analysts, and logistics coordinators inside the company's large testing warehouse. The space buzzed with drones suspended from rails, digital weather projections flashing across screens, and prototype rescue pods lined in perfect rows. Marcus stood at the center, broad shoulders relaxed but commanding attention without effort. "Today we stop testing for presentation," he said evenly. "We test for failure." The phrase unsettled a few team members. Failure was not a word commonly welcomed in executive summaries. Elena watched from a distance, arms folded, saying nothing. She wanted the team to respond to Marcus, not to her authority. The first simulation recreated a mountain blizzard scenario. Artificial snow blasted from industrial fans, while temperature controls dropped rapidly. Engineers monitored sensors from a glass-enclosed control room. Marcus stepped directly into the storm simulation with 2 junior responders. Within minutes, flaws emerged. Drone navigation faltered under ice buildup. Communication lag spiked when signal towers were partially obstructed. Portable heaters drained power faster than projected. Marcus did not raise his voice. He simply called out observations calmly, forcing the team to confront what spreadsheets had overlooked. "In a real storm," he said over the wind, "these delays cost lives." After the simulation ended, silence filled the warehouse. No applause, no polished presentation, just a clear understanding that improvement was necessary. Over the next month, adjustments rolled out rapidly. Hardware was reinforced, communication protocols were simplified, equipment interfaces were redesigned for gloved operation. Slowly, skepticism turned into cautious respect. Engineers began approaching Marcus voluntarily for feedback before finalizing designs. He listened carefully, never dismissing ideas outright, but always redirecting focus to real-world consequence. One afternoon, a senior analyst who had initially opposed his appointment lingered after a meeting. "You don't talk like an executive," she said bluntly. Marcus offered a faint smile. "I'm not one." She hesitated before adding, "But you lead like one." It was the first genuine acknowledgement from within the ranks. Meanwhile, Elena faced external pressure. Investors questioned why development costs were rising under the new testing standards. Media outlets speculated that her leadership style had become emotionally driven. She responded to every inquiry with measured calm. "We are building systems that must perform under extreme conditions," she stated during one interview. "Optimization requires realism." Behind closed doors, however, the board remained uneasy. During a quarterly review, a director leaned forward and asked, "Is this about redemption, Elena?" The implication was clear. Was she correcting personal guilt rather than executing sound strategy? Elena met his gaze steadily. "This is about accuracy," she replied. "If we claim to save lives, our systems must survive reality." She did not mention Everest. She did not mention being carried down a mountain, but the conviction in her voice silenced further debate. At home, Marcus navigated a different kind of adjustment. Daniel had transferred to a better-funded school supported by Elena's expanded educational initiative. The boy struggled at first, unsure of the new environment. One evening, while reviewing homework at the kitchen table, Daniel asked quietly, "Are you famous now?" Marcus paused, considering the question carefully. "No," he answered. "I just have a different job." Daniel studied him thoughtfully. "Kids at school said you work for a billionaire." Marcus nodded once. "I work with one." The distinction mattered to him. Fame was not the goal. Stability remained his anchor. After Daniel went to bed, Marcus stood by the apartment window, city lights flickering below. The responsibility he carried now felt different from Everest. Up there, decisions were immediate and visible. Down here, consequences unfolded slowly, but affected far more lives. Back at headquarters, the first live deployment opportunity arrived sooner than expected. A severe earthquake struck a remote mountainous region overseas, overwhelming local emergency services. VOS Dynamics had an opportunity to deploy their upgraded systems in real conditions. The board hesitated, concerned about liability. Marcus reviewed the data carefully, calculating terrain access points and supply limitations. Elena watched him analyze satellite images with quiet intensity. "Can we make a difference?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. "If we move fast," he said finally. The decision required boldness. Elena approved the deployment within the hour. Media attention reignited, framing the move as either visionary or reckless. When the team launched, Marcus traveled with them, leaving Elena at headquarters to manage coordination. The field conditions were brutal. Aftershocks rattled unstable slopes. Weather patterns shifted unpredictably. Yet this time, the technology held steady. Drones navigated debris-filled valleys without freezing. Communication signals remained stable under obstruction. Portable heaters drained power faster than projected. Marcus did not raise his voice. He simply called out observations calmly, forcing the team to confront what spreadsheets had overlooked. "In a real storm," he said over the wind, "these delays cost lives." After the simulation ended, silence filled the warehouse. No applause, no polished presentation, just a clear understanding that improvement was necessary. Over the next month, adjustments rolled out rapidly. Hardware was reinforced, communication protocols were simplified, equipment interfaces were redesigned for gloved operation. Slowly, skepticism turned into cautious respect. Engineers began approaching Marcus voluntarily for feedback before finalizing designs. He listened carefully, never dismissing ideas outright, but always redirecting focus to real-world consequence. One afternoon, a senior analyst who had initially opposed his appointment lingered after a meeting. "You don't talk like an executive," she said bluntly. Marcus offered a faint smile. "I'm not one." She hesitated before adding, "But you lead like one." It was the first genuine acknowledgement from within the ranks. Meanwhile, Elena faced external pressure. Investors questioned why development costs were rising under the new testing standards. Media outlets speculated that her leadership style had become emotionally driven. She responded to every inquiry with measured calm. "We are building systems that must perform under extreme conditions," she stated during one interview. "Optimization requires realism." Behind closed doors, however, the board remained uneasy. During a quarterly review, a director leaned forward and asked, "Is this about redemption, Elena?" The implication was clear. Was she correcting personal guilt rather than executing sound strategy? Elena met his gaze steadily. "This is about accuracy," she replied. "If we claim to save lives, our systems must survive reality." She did not mention Everest. She did not mention being carried down a mountain, but the conviction in her voice silenced further debate. At home, Marcus navigated a different kind of adjustment. Daniel had transferred to a better-funded school supported by Elena's expanded educational initiative. The boy struggled at first, unsure of the new environment. One evening, while reviewing homework at the kitchen table, Daniel asked quietly, "Are you famous now?" Marcus paused, considering the question carefully. "No," he answered. "I just have a different job." Daniel studied him thoughtfully. "Kids at school said you work for a billionaire." Marcus nodded once. "I work with one." The distinction mattered to him. Fame was not the goal. Stability remained his anchor. After Daniel went to bed, Marcus stood by the apartment window, city lights flickering below. The responsibility he carried now felt different from Everest. Up there, decisions were immediate and visible. Down here, consequences unfolded slowly, but affected far more lives. Back at headquarters, the first live deployment opportunity arrived sooner than expected. A severe earthquake struck a remote mountainous region overseas, overwhelming local emergency services. VOS Dynamics had an opportunity to deploy their upgraded systems in real conditions. The board hesitated, concerned about liability. Marcus reviewed the data carefully, calculating terrain access points and supply limitations. Elena watched him analyze satellite images with quiet intensity. "Can we make a difference?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. "If we move fast," he said finally. The decision required boldness. Elena approved the deployment within the hour. Media attention reignited, framing the move as either visionary or reckless. When the team launched, Marcus traveled with them, leaving Elena at headquarters to manage coordination. The field conditions were brutal. Aftershocks rattled unstable slopes. Weather patterns shifted unpredictably. Yet this time, the technology held steady. Drones navigated debris-filled valleys without freezing. Communication signals remained stable under obstruction. Portable heaters drained power faster than projected. Marcus did not raise his voice. He simply called out observations calmly, forcing the team to confront what spreadsheets had overlooked. "In a real storm," he said over the wind, "these delays cost lives." After the simulation ended, silence filled the warehouse. No applause, no polished presentation, just a clear understanding that improvement was necessary. Over the next month, adjustments rolled out.
The night of the charity gala arrived wrapped in silver light and quiet anticipation, and the towering glass ballroom shimmered like a promise waiting to be kept. Yet, beneath the crystal chandeliers and the soft hum of wealth and influence, the true story unfolding had nothing to do with donations or press coverage, and everything to do with two people who had stripped away pride and prejudice to see each other clearly at last. Amelia Laurent stood at the top of the staircase, breathtaking in a sleek midnight gown that matched the confidence in her posture, her presence commanding the room not because she owned half the city, but because she had finally learned how to own her vulnerability. And when her eyes found Daniel Reyes across the marble floor, she did not see the janitor uniform he once wore or the assumptions she once made. She saw the strong man who had rebuilt his life from ashes, the father who had fought silently for his son, and the quiet hero whose tattoo had once stopped her cold and forced her to confront the limits of her own understanding. Daniel, dressed in a tailored black suit that fit his broad frame with understated precision, stood beside his son Mateo, who looked up at his father with pride that needed no explanation. And though Daniel's posture remained humble, there was no trace of the invisible weight he used to carry, because tonight he was not here as an employee blending into the background, but as a partner in the foundation Amelia had created in honor of second chances, a foundation inspired by the very story etched into his skin and the sacrifices it represented. The guests whispered as Amelia descended the stairs, not alone, but with purpose, and when she reached Daniel, she did not extend a hand in formality, but rested her fingers lightly against his arm, right where the ink told its story, the ink that once symbolized a fallen unit, a burned building, a decision that saved lives at the cost of his own career, and the ink that reminded her how quickly judgment can blind even the most accomplished mind. She turned toward the audience and spoke not as a billionaire addressing donors, but as a woman who had been wronged and chosen to grow, admitting in calm, steady tones that the man beside her had once worked quietly in her building while carrying a history of bravery she had been too distracted to notice, and that his strength was not measured by titles or income, but by character, loyalty, and the way he had never let hardship turn into bitterness. The room fell silent in a way that felt respectful rather than shocked, and Daniel felt the subtle squeeze of Mateo's hand as Amelia announced that the Laurent Foundation's newest initiative would fund vocational training and educational grants for single parents rebuilding their lives, a program Daniel himself would help lead because no consultant could match lived experience. As applause filled the ballroom, Daniel realized that the humiliation he once endured had become the very doorway to purpose, and Amelia realized that the power she once used to protect her image now felt far better when used to elevate someone else's story. Later, when the formalities faded and the crowd dispersed into conversations about markets and philanthropy, Amelia and Daniel slipped onto the quiet terrace overlooking the city skyline, the lights below flickering like 1,000 unwritten chapters, and for a moment neither spoke because silence between them had become comfortable, not strained. Amelia admitted softly that the night she mocked him still haunted her, not because of public embarrassment, but because she had seen in his eyes the steady dignity of a man who did not need approval. And Daniel answered with honesty that her apology had mattered more than she knew, not because it erased the sting, but because it proved that even people at the top can choose humility. Mateo joined them, tugging at his father's sleeve and asking if the foundation would help kids like him go to college one day, and Daniel knelt to meet his son's gaze, promising that it would, and that sometimes the hardest seasons build the strongest futures. And Amelia watched the exchange with a warmth she had once believed she was too driven to desire. In that quiet moment, she understood that success without connection had always felt incomplete, and Daniel understood that resilience without recognition can still bloom when given light. The city breeze carried the faint echo of music from inside, but out there on the terrace, the only thing that mattered was the shared understanding that neither of them had been defined by the labels once thrown at them, and that strength can wear a tailored gown or a calloused hand and still be equally powerful. The next morning, headlines would focus on donations and expansion plans, but those who had witnessed the exchange knew the deeper truth, that redemption often begins with a single pause, a single glance at something unexpected, a single moment when pride yields to curiosity. Daniel's tattoo, once a private reminder of loss and loyalty, had become a bridge rather than a barrier, and Amelia's polished confidence had evolved into something steadier and more grounded because it now rested on empathy rather than image. As they left the gala together, not as employer and employee, but as partners walking side by side, the past no longer felt like a wound, but like a foundation stone, and the journey ahead, though uncertain, felt earned rather than granted. Their story did not end with applause or romance defined by spectacle. It settled into something quieter and stronger, a partnership built on respect, shared purpose, and the understanding that the strongest people are often those who endure misunderstanding without losing themselves. And as the doors closed behind them and the city nights stretched wide with possibility, one truth remained clear. Sometimes the person the world overlooks is the very one who changes it, and sometimes the person who holds the most power is the one who learns how to listen. If this chapter moved you and you believe in stories about strength, redemption, and unexpected love, make sure you stay connected with Drew Daily Stories for more journeys that remind us that appearances can deceive, but character never does.
If this story pulled you in, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Drew Daily Stories for more unforgettable twists, powerful characters, and moments that change everything. Like, comment your thoughts, and share this with someone who believes strength often hides in plain sight.